Hi there, you're listening to Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. I'm Ian Willoughby. This time out, my guest is somebody who I've known for about 2 decades, the Prague-based journalist Evan Rail, who writes about beverages and travel for a number of high-end outlets. Evan is just about to bring out a new book, The Absinthe Forger, a gripping true crime story that also explores the fascinating history of the spirit itself. Central to the book is the absinthe produced before the evil drink was banned virtually everywhere in the early 20th century, only to make a comeback in the 1990s, a revival in which Czechia played a major part. I spoke to Evan Rail about that connection and much more for this edition of Prague Talk. Your book is a true crime story about a man selling fake pre-1915 absinthe to enthusiasts online. It's also a story about absinthe itself. What was the starting point for the book?
Well, the starting point for the book was when I was contacted by a Czech absinthe fan, or as the locals call themselves, absinteurs. People who like absinthe, they're called absinteurs, or call themselves that. And he wrote to me because he wanted me to write an article about a forger who had ripped off a bunch of his friends. I didn't have room for the article at the time, but I came back to it and I started researching the forger, the counterfeiter, for the article I was due to write. And I realized there was just much more to this story that I couldn't include in a short article.
Why was this guy selling pre-ban absinthe? That means before 1915. Or why is that particularly valued?
Well, absinthe is a special spirit. People love whiskey, people love rum, people collect tequilas and mezcal, but there is no spirit in the world that has been banned almost everywhere around the planet for almost a century. There's no other spirit in the world that has been treated so badly and has been maligned and talked about as an evil drink, a drink that causes crime. And as well, there's no other spirit in the world with so much mystery and romance around it. Because of the ban that came about, there's this kind of breaking point between the earlier era of absinthe before the ban and then the modern day. And those collectible bottles from before the ban took all absinthe off the market, virtually all absinthe off the market, are really sought out by people who want to know what absinthe truly tasted like. Because remember, for most of us, there was no absinthe at all. There was only pre-ban absinthe, and there was almost no other absinthe being produced in the world at that time, except in one country.
Which was?
Yeah, the Czech Republic.
Why was it an exception here, do you know?
Well, absinthe was banned almost everywhere around the world, leading up to World War I and in the aftermath of World War I. And I guess Czechoslovakia, having quite a few things to deal with in the First Republic in the earliest years of its founding after 1918, probably had a lot of other things that it was busy with, and it never got around to banning absinthe. So absinthe was never banned here in the First Republic of Czechoslovakia. I don't believe it was banned under the communists, in communist Czechoslovakia. And after the Velvet Revolution, absinthe was legal here. So people started to produce it.
But again, about the pre-ban absinthe, one of the people you speak to in the book says that absinthe doesn't improve with age, unlike a fine wine. Why are people prepared to spend thousands upon thousands of euros to try and obtain some?
I think it really has to do with that sense of romance and mystery, and also the fact that you can connect to the famous drinkers of absinthe. Unlike a lot of other spirits, absinthe had proponents who kind of are at the hierarchy of culture in our civilization. You know, people like Oscar Wilde wrote about absinthe. Poets like Baudelaire and Verlaine loved absinthe. You have painters, impressionist painters, whose works are considered masterpieces, who were fueled by absinthe. So when you get a pre-ban bottle, when you open a pre-ban bottle, if you find one, you're not just tasting something that's tangentially connected to these famous cultural figures from a century ago. You're actually tasting the same spirit that they tasted. You're drinking the same spirit, probably even the same batch, if not possibly even the same bottle that one of them might have held or opened or poured a drink from.
And not all the collectors actually drink it, right? Some of them just buy it and keep it.
Yeah, people approach collecting historic absinthe in different ways. And for some people, it's a work of art on its own, closed, sealed, never to be opened. They talk about it as if opening a historic bottle ruins it.
You, though, have yourself had pre-1915 absinthe. How was it?
I've had it a few times in a few different places. I've had examples that were absolutely 100% not counterfeited. I'm virtually certain of that, while there were counterfeit examples floating around. And I can tell you that it was exquisite. It was a remarkable beverage. It was one of the greatest drinking experiences of my life. The times that I've been able to taste it have all ranked as some of the most special drinking experiences I've ever had. But I have to say, I don't know exactly that it's the spirit itself that is special or my reverence for it. That is, what is special about drinking pre-ban absinthe might come from me as well as from the bottle.
Also, though you are familiar with very high quality modern day absinthe, how did the old stuff compare just in terms of taste?
Producers who make absinthe today have told me that absinthe, young absinthe, is really wild. It's sort of kicking and bucking. It's got elbows and shoulders. But when you taste those historic spirits, they actually taste very civilized, very put together, very much in control. The tastes are harmonious. The aromas are like a symphony. And it doesn't have a lot of wildness. It has a taste that seems compressed and whole.
At the center of your book is the story of the absinthe forger, this guy selling fake old absinthe for large amounts of money for people who he meets through Facebook groups. They begin getting suspicious that he's turning up so much of his stuff. That's unlikely. But still, I was wondering, how much money could he ever have made? There's always going to be a limited market. Even if he was bringing out more than was conceivably realistic, it was still going to be limited. You actually met this guy. What do you think his motivations were?
That was a big part of writing this book and researching this book and eventually coming back into contact with him. I met him originally many years ago at an absinthe festival, and we were in contact over the years before anyone knew that he was a forger. He was one of my friends on social media, and we had DMs, private messages together several times, and we talked about collecting. What was his motivation is a question I've asked myself over and over again, and I think a big part of the book is trying to figure that out. I can tell you that the people who knew him and who figured out his crimes, his fraud, have various ideas about his motivation. And for a number of them, it's money, but a lot of them put it at something more psychological. That is, a lot of them credited it to his desire to be smarter than someone else, to show that he was smarter than someone else, to trick people. He did little things that were just sort of like a joke almost, like he wanted to be caught. He would send a sample of absinthe, a fake absinthe, to someone who made absinthe, to a distiller who wanted to try it. And the absinthe that he was sending them would actually contain some of the distiller's own absinthe in it. He was making his own forgeries. He was composing them by blending modern absinthes along with other flavorings and spirits and so forth. And sometimes he would actually send a distiller's own spirit mixed and blended with other things back to that distiller, I think in order to say, haha, you can't even taste well enough to recognize your own spirit.
Absinthe had a kind of revival, I guess, in the 1990s and 2000s. It basically became available again on European markets. How did that happen?
Well, it happened because the Czech Republic never banned absinthe. So in the naughty 90s, there were Czech producers of absinthe who were, back here basically unknown, putting out something they called absinthe, and a British importer, originally a British beer importer, realized that the Czechs were making absinthe and started looking into how he could import absinthe back to the UK. There was something at the time in the EU, a reciprocity agreement, and the Czech Republic was a candidate country to join the EU, and at the time the UK was part of the EU. And what it meant was that something that was legal for sale in one country needed to be legal for sale in another country. Effectively, if it's possible here, it's possible there. The Czechs were already selling and distributing absinthe, so this importer argued that he should be able to import absinthe into the UK. as from one EU candidate country to another EU country. It was all the same thing. And legally, he was correct. It was allowed. Surprisingly, in 1998, it started up at the end of 1998 and very early in 1999. Czech absinthe started showing up on bar shelves and at promotions and parties in the UK. And it became a real buzz-worthy drink. People were really into it. It was new, and yet it was old. It had been banned, but it was available again. It was from France in the 19th century, but it was also from this cool new country that everyone was in love with at the time. And you started seeing it in movies. It shows up in, I think, Bram Stoker's Dracula at the time and other movies like that. So it had a lot of mystique around it and a lot of trendiness, and it became popular. But I don't think it ever became the next big thing. It just remained the next big thing without ever claiming the title of being the top of the pile. Today, people drink a lot more mezcal and whiskey and gin and vodka, and absinthe remains kind of a secondary, tertiary spirit on the market.
Well, I first came across absinthe for sale in Prague in the 90s in bars. You'd see people doing this kind of ritual thing with flame, sugar, spoons, and all this. You suggest in the book that this tradition is tenuous.
Yeah, it's definitely not historic. There are many ways to drink absinthe, but the one where you light it on fire was definitely invented in the 1990s as a marketing ploy, as a way of making something kind of interesting happen with absinthe when they were beginning to import it to the UK. It's the so-called Bohemian method of serving absinthe, and it's, generally speaking, it's garbage. It's not really thought of as a great way to serve it. But there are many other ways to serve absinthe that are more historically accurate and probably more tasteful, and certainly less dangerous than lighting an alcoholic beverage on fire while you're consuming alcohol.
I think I tried absinthe in those days, possibly made by the brand you referred to in the book called Hills. It was absinthe without an E at the end, and it was rank. It was terrible stuff. But I'm curious, should I feel like I've never actually had absinthe if I've only had that kind of stuff?
Yeah, the one that kicked off the whole absinthe revival, and there's a huge amount of irony in this, was not a good example of what absinthe is or was or can be. It was called Hills. It's still on the market, and it is a drink, but it's not a drink that aficionados of absinthe, connoisseurs or fans of absinthe would recommend. It's generally kind of looked down upon. Ironically, this bad or not great absinthe kicked off the revival that led to modern absinthes being legal again and being wonderfully high quality again. But at the time, it was not exactly the proper thing.
But today, the Czech Republic is producing good quality absinthe, you say?
Yes, there are a couple of producers who are absolutely top shelf. One of them is Martin Žufanek, who has been making great absinthes for about a decade or more, and his spirits are revered by collectors, I believe. I have a whole chapter about Martin Žufanek in my book because he is a collector of historic spirits himself. He has many historic bottles, and he has produced reproductions of historic absinthe recipes going all the way back to the end of the 18th century. So Martin Žufanek's spirits are very well received. They're delicious. And there's another producer, Mr. Šlechta, who produces absinthe here in Prague, and his brand name is Prince d'Absinthe, and the Prince of Absinthe in French. I haven't been able to try his spirits. They are so recherché and rare and hard to get, but everyone says they are quite well made and really, really delicious. So I'm looking forward to trying those soon.
To digress for a second, you also refer in the book to the fact that fake beer was sold in or by, rather, Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, there were several versions of fake beer. It's known, for example, that one of the first cases of beer fraud that I came across was Pilsner Urquell being sold in Bratislava, but it wasn't Pilsner Urquell. Some other brand was being sold as the original Pilsner in Bratislava, and the brewery from Pilsen actually sued a bar owner in Bratislava. That was in the 1930s, but quite a few brewers have told me a story about how certain beers used to be sold abroad by the communists as Pilsner Urquell, which was a very sought-after brand and is today. It's considered a very good beer. But under communism, the authorities would export other beers that were not Pilsner Urquell and sell it as Pilsner Urquell to unsuspecting customers in Western Europe.
But surely if you had ever had Pilsner Urquell and then they sold you Krušovice, you would notice the difference.
Well, I think most people would say that you would, but that actually is a testament to the quality of Krušovice in previous generations. The story is always told to me by Czech brewers who say, hey, if you want to know something funny, 30 or 40 years ago, Krušovice was so good, it was a stand-in for Pilsner Urquell when people couldn't get Pilsner Urquell, and it was sold outside of the country as Pilsner Urquell. It had a much higher quality, or rather it had a different taste profile that was closer to the original Pilsner than the one we have today.
That reminds me, there was a technician who worked here at the radio who told me one time in a really kind of excited tones, my dad told me there was a pub in Prague and he swears that they had really good Krušovice. Honestly, it's true.
I've heard that story about other beers as well. People will talk about Staropramen, which is generally not considered a connoisseur's beer, but they will tell you that there are pubs that serve really, really good Staropramen, and that is true. This is one aspect of Czech drinking culture that I find very nuanced, that people will recognize that the quality of a beer is not just from the brewery, but also up to the pub.
Finally, Evan, the Absinthe Forger is coming out in the middle of October. What are your hopes for the book? I've seen it listed as one of the crime books to watch out for this autumn.
Well, I just hope people read it and learn to appreciate something about this wonderful, romantic, and mysterious spirit that is quite a rewarding drink. It's very nuanced, and it can be a delicious beverage. There's a huge history there that has been fun for me to explore. And I think people will probably get a lot out of learning about the history of this remarkable spirit.
Many thanks indeed to Evan Rail for that interview about his new book, The Absinthe Forger, a true story of deception, betrayal, and the world's most dangerous spirit, to give the book its full title. It'll be released by US publisher Melville House on the 15th of October 2024. Prague Talk is a podcast produced by Radio Prague International. If you're new to us and enjoyed this conversation, why not check out some of the 100 plus earlier editions and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. For now, from me, Ian Willoughby, thank you so much for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.